Overall, I think that many people believe that Ukraine is winning. I recently saw many NATO officials come to that conclusion as well. There's a simple reason for it. Russia is not objectively winning on the battlefield, and back home inside of Russia, it's taking more hits. Today, the situation in Russia to get gasoline, it's absolutely phenomenal. It's something like the Hunger Games. We are reaching a point where we could see very well a palace coup against Putin. Russia's elites today are under incredible pressure. There's a Kremlin that's run out of money, and it doesn't have enough to pay off the old oligarchical class that used to have. It can't pay off all the elites, people from the intelligence services, from the military. And so now it's seizing it from the elites who aren't considered to be as close to the Kremlin as others. In fact, it's been about $50 billion taken since the start of the war. To put that in comparison, that's more than all of the federal expenditures on education and healthcare combined. To put it another way, 1 in 10 of Forbes' list of billionaires in Russia has faced total confiscation or forced sale of what he owns. 1 in 8 total billionaires in Russia is having assets taken from the state one way or another. Now, when you look at this as a whole, it might seem like it's just an incidental cause, but overall, it's something truly dramatic. It's about 36% of all of Russia's mergers and acquisitions. And last year, were actually forced seizures by the state. In Russia as a whole, it's very clear that there is an ongoing civil war that's occurring between the different branches, the different sections of the government. There are those representing the coercive powers, things like the intelligence service. There are those that are close to Putin, that come back from his St. Petersburg days before he even came to the presidency. These different groups, though, they don't all get along. And today, as there's less avenues for them to have revenue streams through their traditional means of making money, they're trying to shake it out of the other oligarchical groups that have more wealth, taking it from those that aren't as close to the presidential administration. One of the ways that they're doing that is seizing the wealth of those who don't live in the country, or those who have expressed views that they claim are not patriotic. Now, by going after them, by stealing their wealth, it's really just redistributing what was already owned by a different class. That as a whole is triggering this larger civil war. And it's one that's leading to a really interesting apex, given the fact that Vladimir Putin himself, he's aging, and eventually he will not be the leader of Russia. They all understand that. And that means eventually somebody will take over after him. So really, it's not just a fight about assets today. It's about what will happen after Putin, because they all understand very well these different factions, they don't get along. Eventually, it'll come to liquidating each other as factions in order to control the wealth as well as the power of the Russian Federation. Overall, we are reaching a point where we could see very well a palace coup against Putin. And that's for a very simple reason. It's not because anybody necessarily is against him as an individual or they ideologically don't agree with him. It's much more simple. It's the fact that today there is such an intense fight, a civil war amongst these different oligarchical groups, these different powerful organizations within Russia, that not all of them are going to make it out of this. There's not enough wealth for everybody. And that means that somebody's going to have to go. Somebody's going to lose everything they have. But that also means that if you realize you're marked to lose it all, do you really just sit there and wait to take it? Or do you act in your own best interest? Let's remember that Vladimir Putin will eventually no longer be leading Russia. And so it's a question as to who will come after him, what will come after him. The smartest thing you can do if you realize that you're on the ways out is to try to reverse that. And the way you can try to reverse that is to sacrifice everything. There's a lot of contention right now as to whether or not Vladimir Putin himself understands that the war, it's no longer within his grasp. They're not gaining. Today, even when they take something like 1 square kilometer, that's working out to over 1,350 casualties. That's a tremendous cost. When you add in the fact they're spending millions of dollars just to do that, plus they're taking massive hits in Russia on things like their oil industry, it actually works out to be tens or hundreds or even $1 billion to take a square kilometer. That's not sustainable in the long term. Nobody would argue that's leading to a victory. But does Putin understand that? Overall, it's really hard to tell, because the reality is that Vladimir Putin is being disinformed and misinformed by those around him who are using him for their own well-being, trying to get from him as much as they can so that then they can fight against the other crowds, the other oligarchical classes, the other factions within the Kremlin. Everybody here is playing their own game. It's not only about the war in Ukraine. Ukraine is a secondary aspect of a larger war already taking place in Moscow. Overall, I think that many people believe that Ukraine is winning. I recently saw many NATO officials come to that conclusion as well. There's a simple reason for it. Russia is not objectively winning on the battlefield, and back home inside of Russia, it's taking more hits. The biggest mistake people make when trying to analyze this war is they talk about things like how many square kilometers have the Russians taken. Well, overall, it's not going great for them. But when you look at the real battlefield, where Ukraine is seeking the fight, it's inside of Russia. It's not the occupied territories of eastern Ukraine. And there we see that Russia is failing in a tremendously grotesque fashion, I would argue, because overall, it is destroying their national economy. There are now oil shortages, as well as gasoline, as well as diesel, across all of the Russian Federation. That's leading to something that is crushing their economy. More than that, we see there are now shortages of basic groceries across Russia. Some basic industries, like those dealing in milk-based products, are already started to go completely broke to the fact that there's no longer the ability to deliver them. Overall costs within Russia, it's become extreme. We see that 1 in 3 civilian airliners in Russia is grounded. What's incredible about that is that not only is it more than double what is normal, it's the fact that some airlines, it's the reversal. It's that they have 3 grounded airplanes for every 1 that can fly. Only part of that's due to fuel. The other part is because they simply don't have spare parts. Russia is in a tremendously bad situation. And as it continues to compound, which it will, it doesn't just get worse, it compounds upon itself. That's where we see that the entire system is becoming destabilized. Today, the situation in Russia to get gasoline, it's absolutely phenomenal. It's something like the Hunger Games, as people go out, scavenge, seek for oil, seek for gasoline, and they usually can't find it. They're willing to pay exorbitant prices in the form of corruption to try to get gasoline. But even then, there's something interesting that happens. Fights break out constantly at the gas stations. Now we've seen people come in from the military and try to take control of that, try to control and create an orderly process. But that just generates more hatred from the population that doesn't like the fact that they and the veterans cut in front of the rest of the line. People have been known to wait more than 5, 6, 7 hours just to fill up their tank. But that's in the regions that still have petrol. Many parts of the country simply don't have any at all, and civilians are told not even to show up with their cars because there's not going to be a drop left for them. I think anyone who worries that these fuel shortages could provoke Putin to do something more drastic or to become more radicalized are missing what's been going on for the past few years. There is the largest war in Europe since World War II. That's about extreme as it can get. The biggest mistake that was made before this, though, was the fact that Putin was not held to the line. He, for years, was already engaged in a war against Ukraine before the 2022 full-scale invasion. But because he thought he could get away with it, he continued to pursue this aggressive policy towards Ukraine that's led to this full-scale war, which has already led to over 1,400,000 Russian casualties. About 435,000 are estimated to be dead Russian soldiers. So when you look at this, I think it's sort of absurd to argue that something worse could happen if Russia lacks fuel. The fact is, this is the way that we can break the Russian war machine. When you look at the footage that's coming out right now of Russian soldiers trying to prepare or get trained, it's pretty embarrassing to say the least. It's in fact a total disaster. A recent data has come out to show that the average Russian soldier, after he signs a contract to join the military, he only typically lives 2 to 3 weeks before he's killed at the front. To put it in another term, the average Russian soldier, he only survives about 20 to 35 minutes, according to Western research, once he reaches near the front against Ukraine. That's why today we see such a lack of training in the Russian soldiers. They're wholly unprepared because the Russians, well, they don't really think that they're going to be very useful when they get there. They'll only get there to hold a spot for a few minutes before their time is up. There's increasing evidence that Vladimir Putin himself is paranoid about what's going to happen next. We see that he's heavily restricted his own travel. He doesn't even travel around Russia anymore. And it seems that the vast majority of the time for the past year, he's spent in a bunker. He doesn't even go to the estates that he has across Russia. That's because he's not sure what could happen next. He's especially afraid of Ukrainian drones. But there's something else, more than the fact that today, Ukraine is able to force the Russian dictator to a position where he doesn't even feel safe in Moscow. There's the fact that he's not sure whom in his own circle might betray him, who might be the Brutus. And because of that, he lives in a heightened state of fear. And that's leading to more irrational decisions that are destructive to what will be the future of his regime. Overall, Vladimir Putin is in an incredible state of weakness right now. Anybody who argues he's a position of strength is not looking at the writing on the wall. Today, the Putin regime is on the brink, and soon it looks like his house of cards will come tumbling down.